and he died suddenly, just like that.
The Rock just dropped a bombshell, and it's not the tribute fans expected. In the wake of Hulk Hogan's death, he's finally revealing why so many wrestlers secretly hated the man behind the mustache. From betrayal to buried careers, this is the real reason Hogan's legacy is being torn apart. The betrayal that changed wrestling forever. On July 24, 2025, the wrestling world lost Hulk Hogan to cardiac arrest at the age of 71, but what should have been a universal outpouring of grief and celebration of his legendary career instead became something far more complex and revealing. While some mourned the loss of their childhood hero, others, including many wrestlers who knew him personally, had very different reactions. The Rock's tribute, while respectful, contained subtle undertones that spoke to a much darker truth about the man behind the Hulkamania facade. But to understand why so many wrestlers harbor such deep resentment toward Hulk Hogan, we need to go back to 1986, to a moment that would forever alter the landscape of professional wrestling and create the foundation for decades of hatred among his peers. Picture this: it's early 1986, just before WrestleMania 2, and the wrestling industry is at a crossroads. Wrestlers are classified as independent contractors, meaning they have no health insurance, no retirement benefits, and no protection against the grueling schedules that would eventually destroy their bodies, and in many cases, end their lives prematurely. Working up to 350 days a year on the road, these performers are putting their bodies through hell with no safety net, no union protection, and no guarantee that they'll be taken care of when their careers inevitably come to an end due to injury or age. Enter Jesse the Body Ventura, a man who understood the power of collective bargaining from his work in other industries. Ventura wasn't just a wrestler, he was a visionary who saw what the industry could become if wrestlers stood together and demanded fair treatment.
We were all in a dressing room, and there was nobody from the office. I waited, and I got up on a chair, and I told everybody, now is our time to unionize. I said, all the publicity's gone out on WrestleMania. I said, if we refuse to wrestle, unless union negotiators are brought in, it's federal law. They have to be brought in. It's the law. And I said, and then if we can get the Charlotte guys to join us, we can freeze them, freeze Vince, and force them to do collective bargaining, and we can finally get a union. And I gave my impassioned speech. Right?
But Ventura knew that for this plan to work, he needed the support of the biggest star in the company. He needed Hulk Hogan. At the time, Hogan wasn't just the top draw. He was the face of the entire wrestling boom, the man who could make or break careers with a single word to Vince McMahon. His endorsement would have been the catalyst that could have changed everything for wrestlers across the industry. What happened next is one of the most devastating betrayals in wrestling history, and it's a betrayal that Jesse Ventura has never forgotten or forgiven. Instead of supporting his fellow wrestlers, instead of using his influence to improve conditions for everyone, Hogan went directly to Vince McMahon and informed him of the union plans, effectively ratting out the entire group. The aftermath was swift and brutal.
The next day I go home, my phone rings, it's Vince. What the union, da-da-da. I said, Vince, I fought him. I said, Vince, I'm not talking about just fighting you and that. I said, right now, this was 1980s. I said, right now I pay $5,000 a year for health care for my family. If we had a union, I might only have to pay $1,250. Because there's strength in numbers.
McMahon confronted Ventura the next day, firing him shortly after and quashing the union drive. This wasn't discovered until years later.
And Vince said, no. My attorney said, well, then how did you know? With no hesitation. Vince answered, Hulk Hogan told me. Now, he's under sworn deposition here. He's under sworn deposition to tell the truth.
Yeah.
There was no hesitation. Hulk Hogan told me. And then Vince also admitted it to Larry King when he was on Larry King, because Larry King brought it up. Is it true that Hulk Hogan's the one that ratted Jesse Ventura when he tried to unionize wrestling? And Vince said, yeah.
Imagine the betrayal Ventura must have felt, learning that someone he considered a friend had been the architect of the union's destruction all along. But here's where the story gets even more damaging to Hogan's legacy. In the 2024 Netflix docuseries, Mr. McMahon, Hogan himself confirmed the story, stating he acted to protect the company and his position. He claimed he didn't want a union because it could disrupt the industry's growth, but critics argue it was pure self-interest. Hogan was earning millions annually through merchandise and pay-per-view bonuses, while his colleagues struggled with basic healthcare and financial security. On Chris Van Vliet's podcast in 2024, Ventura called Hogan's excuse lame and accused him of lying to avoid being labeled a stooge. Similarly, on the Bill Simmons podcast in 2024, Ventura emphasized how Hogan sold us out for personal gain. These aren't old grudges that have faded with time. This is fresh anger from a man who has had decades to reflect on how one person's selfishness changed the trajectory of an entire industry. The impact of this betrayal cannot be overstated. This incident set a precedent, delaying unionization in wrestling for decades. To this day, WWE wrestlers are independent contractors without full union protections, leading to ongoing issues like high injury rates, lack of pensions, and overwork. Think about the wrestlers we've lost over the years: Owen Hart, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, and consider how different their stories might have been with proper union protections and healthcare. Figures like these might have benefited from better safeguards, as Ventura has argued. But because of Hogan's betrayal in 1986, wrestlers continued to suffer under a system that prioritized profit over their well-being. Public backlash has grown, especially post-2024, with social media users labeling Hogan a union buster and linking it to broader labor exploitation in entertainment. In a 2025 Instagram post, one user called Hogan's actions part of why wrestlers die early, untimely deaths. This isn't hyperbole. This is the recognition that Hogan's decision to prioritize his own wealth and status over the collective good of his profession has had deadly consequences. But the union busting was just the beginning. What we're about to explore in the coming parts of this series will show you how this pattern of self-serving behavior extended throughout Hogan's entire career, how he used his influence to systematically destroy the careers of rising stars, and how his massive ego and chronic dishonesty created a toxic environment that wrestlers are still dealing with today. The Rock's recent revelations, combined with decades of testimonies from wrestlers who worked with Hogan, paint a picture of a man who was willing to sacrifice anyone and anything to maintain his position at the top of the wrestling world. This isn't about jealousy or professional rivalry. This is about a systematic pattern of betrayal that spans decades and continues to impact the wrestling industry today. The politics of destruction, how Hogan buried careers. Let's start with understanding just how much power Hulk Hogan wielded behind the scenes. Hogan's backstage politics are legendary in wrestling circles, often described as unmatched in scope and impact. He reportedly used his star power to rewrite scripts, veto storylines, and ensure he remained the focal point of promotions, starting with his close relationship with Vince McMahon that gave him significant sway over booking decisions. But it was during his time in WCW that Hogan's political maneuvering reached its most destructive heights. His reputation as a master backstage politician stems from knowing how to play the game better than anyone, angling for self-promotion while sidelining threats. In WCW during the 1990s, Hogan's influence intensified with a creative control clause in his contract, allowing him to approve or reject match outcomes. This creative control clause became a weapon that Hogan used to protect his character while frustrating bookers and talent alike. The most notorious example of this political maneuvering occurred at one of WCW's biggest events, and it perfectly illustrates how Hogan's ego could destroy what should have been career-defining moments for other wrestlers. Starrcade 1997 stands as perhaps the most damaging example of Hogan's political interference. This was supposed to be Sting's moment, the culmination of a year-long storyline where the silent, mysterious Sting would finally defeat the villainous Hollywood Hogan and reclaim WCW for the good guys. The wrestling world was watching, and this match had the potential to be remembered as one of the greatest moments in wrestling history. Instead, Hogan allegedly politicized the finish against Sting, turning what should have been a clean, triumphant loss for Hogan into a convoluted scenario with a fast count and restart, diminishing Sting's victory. Rather than allowing Sting to have his definitive moment, Hogan's interference turned the entire finish into a confusing mess that left fans frustrated and robbed Sting of the clean victory that the storyline demanded. This wasn't just about one match. His actions contributed to WCW's internal chaos as he prioritized his NWO, New World Order faction, which dominated airtime but alienated other stars. The NWO was supposed to be a storyline device to eventually put over WCW's heroes, but under Hogan's influence, it became a vehicle for his own ego, suffocating other storylines and preventing new stars from emerging. But Hogan's destructive politics weren't limited to WCW. When he returned to WWE in the 2000s, the same patterns emerged. In 2005, backstage tensions, including disputes over creative direction and pay, led to his abrupt departure from WWE, with Jim Ross attributing it to political maneuvering. Even in his later years, Hogan Hogan couldn't resist trying to control outcomes and storylines to benefit himself. In TNA, starting in 2010, Hogan and Eric Bischoff's regime overhauled the product, shifting from innovative wrestling to a more entertainment-focused style, which fans and critics say tanked ratings and alienated the roster. Once again, Hogan's involvement led to the decline of a wrestling promotion that had been building momentum before his arrival. Now let's talk about Hogan's most damaging behavior: his systematic refusal to lose matches cleanly, particularly to wrestlers who could have benefited from defeating him. In wrestling, putting someone over by losing to them is how you elevate new stars and create the next generation of main event talents. But Hogan, driven by his desire to preserve his invincible image, often refused to do this, citing concerns over his drawing power. The list of wrestlers who were denied career-defining victories over Hogan reads like a who's who of wrestling legends whose careers could have reached even greater heights. Bret Hart's situation in 1993 perfectly illustrates Hogan's selfishness. Hogan refused to drop the WWF title to Hart at SummerSlam, insisting Hart wasn't a big enough draw. Instead, he lost to Yokozuna briefly before Hart won it later, delaying Hart's main event push and leading Hart to later accuse Hogan of sabotaging his career. The damage to Bret Hart's career trajectory was significant. Hart was one of the most technically gifted wrestlers of his generation, a man who could have carried the company through the transition period of the early 1990s. But Hogan's refusal to pass the torch cleanly meant that Hart's ascension was delayed and complicated, robbing fans of what could have been an even more legendary career. At Starrcade 1997, the Sting situation we discussed earlier not only ruined what could have been Sting's defining moment, but also caused fans to boo the outcome. Imagine being Sting in that moment. You've spent a year building to this match, the storyline has been perfectly crafted, and then your opponent's political maneuvering turns your greatest triumph into a confusing mess. In 2005, Hogan's refusal to do a clean job for Shawn Michaels led to one of the most unprofessional displays in wrestling history. Hogan backed out of a planned series of matches, agreeing to only one where he would win. This led Michaels to oversell Hogan's moves in protest, creating an awkward spectacle that highlighted Hogan's ego and unwillingness to help elevate other talents.
And so all of a sudden The Rock comes out, gets in the middle of the ring, challenges me to WrestleMania. I go to shake his hand, he won't let my hand go. He pulls me back in. And right where face to face, he rock bottoms me, and dumps me in the middle of the ring on the back of my head.
Even in his match with The Rock at WrestleMania 18, which is often celebrated as one of the greatest matches of all time, there were initially concerns about Hogan's willingness to do business.
Well, Monster, before you go to Toronto, I need you down in Miami tomorrow. I said, Miami? Why Miami? Well, The Rock wants to rehearse the match. I said, rehearse what? I've never rehearsed anything in my life. What are you talking about? Well, we just want to make sure you can still go.
The fact that WWE felt the need to have Hogan rehearse the match in Miami speaks to their concerns about whether he would actually follow through with the planned finish.
Sitting in this 100-degree warehouse is Rocky Johnson, Rock's dad, going, Dwayne, listen to Hogan.
Oh, man.
Dwayne, listen to Hogan.
Even The Rock's own father was trying to get his son to defer to Hogan's experience and likely his political preferences. Randy Orton's momentum as a top heel was stunted when Hogan refused to job cleanly at SummerSlam 2006, winning via his signature moves. Orton was being positioned as the future of the company, but Hogan's refusal to put him over cleanly damaged his credibility at a crucial moment in his career development. The infamous Bash at the Beach 2000 incident shows just how far Hogan would go to avoid losing. In WCW, Hogan invoked creative control to refuse losing the title to Jeff Jarrett, walking out and prompting Vince Russo's shoot promo, trashing him. This incident contributed to WCW's downfall, and while Hogan sued for defamation, he eventually settled, suggesting that Russo's claims had merit. But perhaps the most telling aspect of Hogan's career-destroying behavior was how it extended beyond just refusing to lose matches. Hogan allegedly downplayed Ultimate Warrior's popularity to McMahon, contributing to his 1990s firings despite fan demand. The Ultimate Warrior was one of the most overperformers in wrestling history, but Hogan's backstage influence helped ensure that Warrior's pushes were short-lived and his returns were complicated. Billy Kidman and others in WCW suffered under Hogan's regime, with Hogan reportedly vetoing pushes for mid-carders like Kidman, calling him uncredible on air, which buried their credibility. This wasn't just about main event positions. Hogan was actively working to prevent mid-card wrestlers from advancing, creating a toxic environment where only his chosen few could succeed. succeed. The broader impact of Hogan's political maneuvering extends far beyond individual career damage. His NWO dominance overshadowed the entire WCW roster, accelerating WCW's decline. Instead of using the NWO as a tool to eventually elevate WCW's heroes, Hogan turned it into a vehicle for his own ego, suffocating other storylines and preventing the company from creating new stars. When Hogan arrived in TNA in 2010, his presence led to format changes that prioritized veterans over young talent, causing ratings drops and the company's near collapse. History repeated itself as another wrestling promotion suffered under Hogan's influence, with promising young wrestlers finding their opportunities limited by Hogan's backstage politics. The psychological impact on wrestlers who had their careers derailed by Hogan's politics cannot be understated. Bret Hart has publicly stated that Hogan ruined his career by not elevating him properly. These aren't minor career disappointments. These are fundamental alterations to wrestling history that robbed fans of potentially legendary storylines and wrestlers of career-defining moments. Recent X conversations amplify this resentment, with users calling Hogan a rat who prevented his fellow wrestlers from forming a union. The anger isn't just about individual career moves. It's about a systematic pattern of selfish behavior that has had lasting impacts on the wrestling industry. The lies, the racism, and The Rock's truth. Let's start with something that might seem minor, but reveals everything about Hogan's relationship with truth: his compulsive lying. Hulk Hogan has been labeled a pathological liar by critics, peers, and even his ex-wife, Linda Hogan, who in a 2024 video called him a complete liar and sex addict amid their messy divorce. But these aren't just personal disputes between ex-spouses. His lies often involve inflating his achievements, fabricating events, or rewriting history for dramatic effect, and these aren't isolated incidents. Compilations from sources like The Sportster, Vice, and YouTube videos highlight dozens of examples of Hogan's fabrications. Wrestling insiders, including Jim Cornette and The Undertaker, have called him out for dishonesty, noting it's an art form he's mastered. When respected figures in the wrestling industry, people who have worked with hundreds of wrestlers over decades, single out one person for their dishonesty, it speaks volumes about the severity of the problem. Let's examine some of the most egregious examples of Hogan's lies, because they reveal a pattern of behavior that goes far beyond typical wrestling storytelling or working the marks. Hogan claimed he wrestled over 400 days in a single year due to time zone differences from international travel. This is mathematically impossible, as a year has only 365 days, yet he repeated this claim in multiple interviews, including on podcasts. This isn't creative storytelling. This is a fundamental disregard for basic facts. Even more damaging are his fabricated stories about potential music careers. Hogan alleged he was offered the bassist role in Metallica and auditioned for the Rolling Stones, but Metallica's Lars Ulrich publicly denied it, stating Hogan was never considered. He also claimed to have played bass on Elvis Presley's sessions and turned down the lead in The Wrestler, 2008, which director Darren Aronofsky refuted. But perhaps the most disgusting example of Hogan's dishonesty involves his exploitation of charity narratives. One of Hogan's most criticized lies involved claiming a terminally ill Make-A-Wish child died in his arms before or during a 1992 Wembley Stadium match. No evidence supports this story, and Hogan later changed details, saying the child died at the event. Critics, including wrestling podcasters, call it disgraceful for exploiting charity narratives. This isn't just a lie. It's the exploitation of a child's death for personal aggrandizement. The fact that Hogan would fabricate such a story reveals a level of moral bankruptcy that goes far beyond typical celebrity embellishment. During a 1991 match with The Undertaker, Hogan claimed a botched tombstone piledriver paralyzed him, blaming Undertaker. Video evidence showed no issue, and Undertaker later called it a lie on his podcast, saying Hogan faked it to avoid jobbing cleanly. This lie not only protected Hogan's character, but potentially damaged The Undertaker's reputation early in his career. Social media reactions, especially post-death on July 24, 2025, amplify this pattern, with ex-users calling him wrestling's biggest liar, with threads referencing his despicable fabrications. The fact that Hogan's death prompted not mourning, but compilations of his lies speaks to how deeply his dishonesty affected those who knew him and worked with him. But lying, as damaging as it was to his relationships with fellow wrestlers, pales in comparison to the racist controversies that truly destroyed Hogan's legacy and revealed the man behind the character. The most devastating blow to Hogan's reputation came from a leaked 2007 tape that revealed Hogan repeatedly using the N-word as a slur while expressing disgust over his daughter Brooke dating a black man. He stated, "I am a racist to a point. which led to WWE terminating his contract, removing him from the Hall of Fame temporarily, and erasing his merchandise. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a single inappropriate comment. Additional audio from 2008 jailhouse calls with his son Nick, who was imprisoned after a car crash that paralyzed a friend, included more racial slurs and stereotypes. This pattern of racist language reveals deeply held beliefs, not momentary mistakes. The scandal resurfaced painful contradictions for black wrestling fans who grew up idolizing Hogan but felt betrayed. Imagine being a young black wrestling fan in the 1980s, inspired by Hogan's messages about training, saying prayers, and eating vitamins, only to discover decades later that this hero viewed you as subhuman. Upon his death, Black Twitter celebrated, with posts like "Satan about to have his way with you, brother," garnering thousands of likes. Recent videos, such as one from rapper Rockness Monsta, explain why black people didn't care about Hogan's passing due to his unrepentant racism. The impact of Hogan's racism extends beyond personal hurt feelings. Many argue this wasn't isolated. Hogan's actions reflected deeper biases, and his apologies felt insincere or damage control oriented. When WWE reinstated him in 2018, black wrestlers like The New Day doubted the sincerity of his backstage apology, noting he focused on being recorded rather than the slurs themselves. Mark Henry offered to help with outreach to black colleges, but Hogan declined, suggesting that his apologies were more about damage control than genuine remorse or desire to make amends. But the racist controversies didn't end with the 2015 revelations. In July 2024, influencer Essence Janai claimed she was hired as a beer ambassador via a third-party agency, but fired after one day when Hogan realized she was black, then replaced with white women. She posted photos, texts about cancellation, and evidence of continued events. While the company denied racism, stating they terminated the agency, not Janai specifically, and Hogan wasn't involved, the timing and circumstances raised suspicions among those familiar with Hogan's history. Now let's examine The Rock's response to Hogan's death, because it reveals how modern wrestlers navigate the complex legacy of someone who was simultaneously a wrestling icon and a deeply flawed individual. In a heartfelt Instagram tribute on July 25, 2025, following Hogan's death on July 24, 2025, from cardiac arrest at age 71, The Rock recounted catching Hogan's headband at a 1984 Madison Square Garden event and Hogan later gifting him one. He called Hogan a childhood hero and praised their WrestleMania match, saying, "It takes two to tango, but that historic crowd reaction was all for you."
I really hadn't seen The Rock since I threw my headband out and he caught it when he was a kid, you know.
That's great.
But notice what The Rock didn't say in his tribute. There was no mention of Hogan's character, no personal anecdotes about their relationship beyond their professional interaction, and no defense of Hogan against his critics. The Rock, who is arguably the most diplomatic and media-savvy wrestler of all time, crafted a tribute that honored Hogan's professional impact while carefully avoiding any endorsement of him as a person. This diplomatic approach reflects the complex position that modern wrestlers find themselves in when discussing Hogan's legacy. They can acknowledge his undeniable impact on the industry while distancing themselves from his personal failings. The Rock's father, Rocky Johnson, a WWE Hall of Famer, helped train Hogan in the 1970s when Hogan was breaking into wrestling in Florida. Hogan has credited Johnson and other black wrestlers like Dusty Rhodes for his early success. This makes Hogan's later racist comments even more hypocritical. He built his career with the help of black wrestlers, then privately expressed racist views about black people. In a 2015 interview amid Hogan's racism scandal, The Rock defended him, saying, "I've known Hogan for a lot of years. I'd not known him to be racist." But this defense came before the full extent of Hogan's racist comments were known and before the pattern of behavior became clear. The contrast between The Rock's 2015 defense and his more measured 2025 tribute suggests an evolution in his understanding of who Hogan really was. The Rock's 2025 tribute was professional and respectful, but it lacked the personal warmth and character endorsement of his earlier defense.
I wish we'd have never talked, you know, because we really didn't do any of that talked about.
Even in discussing their legendary WrestleMania 18 match, Hogan revealed that he essentially ignored The Rock's input and called the match his own way. This speaks to Hogan's inability to truly collaborate, even with someone he respected professionally. The broader wrestling community's reaction to Hogan's death revealed the deep divisions his behavior created. While WWE aired tributes, black fans and wrestlers like D.L. Hewley and Roland Martin highlighted his racism. Ex-posts emphasized separating Hulk Hogan, inspirational character, from Terry Bollea, racist individual. individual. Others condemned him outright, with posts like, "He died a racist, a union buster." Influencer Joey Swole's tribute sparked backlash, leading to his online retirement. Even more telling, Brooke Hogan skipped his funeral and inheritance, citing his disrespect toward her dating a black man. When your own daughter refuses to attend your funeral specifically because of your racist behavior, it speaks to how deeply these attitudes affected even your closest family relationships. The wrestling industry today is grappling with how to remember Hulk Hogan. His contributions to the mainstream popularity of wrestling are undeniable. He helped turn wrestling from a regional attraction into a global phenomenon. But his personal behavior, from the union busting to the career destruction to the racist comments to the chronic lying, created a legacy that's impossible to separate from the character he portrayed. Recent discussions, amplified by his 2025 death, have resurfaced these issues, with outlets like Slate noting everyone hated Hulk Hogan for his betrayals. Ventura, in a 2025 YouTube clip, summed up Hogan's legacy as union busting and placating to those in power. That brings us to the end of this video. For more videos like this, click on the cards on your screen.